there are billions of people at the edges of degraded landscapes. Humanity needs to restore large-scale degraded landscapes. To have the people be able to feed themselves, be treated with respect, and return their human rights and have a place to live on the earth.
To Facing Future TV, live from COP28 in the UAE in Dubai. Our program today is Transforming Food for a Sustainable World, and this is a critical intervention at COP28. We're focused on the intersection of food systems, agriculture, and climate change. This program aims to explore the transformative potential of sustainable food practices and regenerative agriculture in both mitigating and adapting to climate change and promoting environmental sustainability. So without further ado, I'll introduce our esteemed panel of guests. First, we will hear from Mr. John Liu. John Liu is an ecosystem restoration researcher, educator, and filmmaker, and he has dedicated his life to sharing real-world examples of once degraded landscapes fully restored to their original fertile and biodiverse beauty. His work has led to the creation of ecosystem restoration camps all over the world. Then we will hear from Willem Ferwerda. He is the founder of Common Land. They work with partners in over 20 countries to restore degraded landscapes and regenerate the earth to make holistic landscape restoration the new norm. And then lastly, but not least, we will hear from Mr. Isaias Hernandez. He is an educator and creative devoted to improving environmental literacy through content creation, storytelling, and public engagement. Isaias is more commonly known by his moniker, Queer Brown Vegan, and the independent media platform he started to bring an intersectional lens to education for all has truly resonated with a worldwide audience. So thank you so much. John, if you could go ahead, set us up, help us understand this transformative work, transforming landscapes, and why this is so important for climate.
Well, in the relationship with food, food is basically growing in the ground, and it needs water, and it needs sunlight, and it needs fertility that comes from the soils. And in my studies and observations, I found that evolutionary succession over all of evolutionary time, it's about 3.8 billion years, the biology self-organized to constantly increase in terms of biodiversity, biomass, and accumulated organic matter. And this is the basis of all the systems that we depend on for life. So this is the creation and constant filtration and continuous renewal of the oxygenated atmosphere, the freshwater system, and fertile soils. So all of our food, and actually everything that human beings have, is available because we're extracting from this living system that has manifested. And 3.8 billion years ago, the Earth was very different than it is now. It was more similar to Mars or the Moon, in that it didn't have an oxygenated atmosphere, it didn't have fresh water, and it didn't have an organic soils. So the fact that we've lost this over vast areas is terrifying. And we can see that here in the Middle East. This is the cradle of Western civilization, and vast deserts exist. But were these vast deserts always here? No. This was the area which was the land of milk and honey that's written about in the Bible. These were the bread baskets for all the major Persia and Egypt and Greece and Rome. So this is about shifting baselines. We're seeing something that's already been impacted by human beings over historical time. And what I've seen is it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems. And if we can restore large-scale degraded landscapes, why don't we do that on a planetary scale? And what I've also seen is that it takes people to do that. And so one of the things that we've come up with, you'll hear from my colleague Willem Ferwerda about very large-scale holistic projects. But what I've also been working on is working on earth restoration camps and communities. It's now called ecosystem restoration communities, and you can go to ecosystemrestorationcommunities.org, or you can go to erc.earth to find this. And in 6 years, it's grown from no camps to 65 camps around the world. So if this kind of exponential growth can continue, there can be hundreds and thousands of these places, these communities. And what you're finding is in these communities, it's possible for people to restore organic soils and to restore vegetative cover and to restore canopy and do rewilding and agroforestry. And that's exactly what we need to do. So we've had 28 COPs discussing policy and finance and so on, but how much has that changed the landscapes of the earth? But what we see in the restoration where people actually do this, they can start today or tomorrow, or they could start earlier if they understood it and if they're trained to do this. And when they all work together, then they have a shared intention, a shared intelligence and a shared intention about this. And they can learn by doing, because this is not a theoretical issue. This is about whether the moisture is absorbed into the ground, whether the surface temperatures are regulated, whether there's a canopy and respiration to allow for the cycling of oxygen and carbon and sequestration of carbon, and the circulation near the earth of moisture.
Tell us a little bit about what is the impact on the community when one of these projects moves forward, when the earth is restored in this way?
Well, I think the first thing is that there's food security. So you can ensure food security in places like this where there's virtually no vegetation. We were just yesterday at Emirates Bio Farm, and it's just beautiful. You can grow everything if you know how to do it in Egypt and other places, and you can see this. We have camps in different parts of the Middle East and North Africa, and they are working. And what happens is the people then can create a more resilient and robust environment for themselves. And that gives them hope, gives them meaning to their lives, and it's more valuable than anything else you could do, because it's both food security and robust resilience for the families and communities, but it's also exactly what we need to mitigate and adapt to climate change on a planetary scale and protect biodiversity.
Thank you. Willem, we hear John talk about this incredible impact of real-world impact, doing something about this. And I know that you're very focused on this as well. Could you talk a bit about Common Land and your work and how this presents a food and climate solution?
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, I recognize the story of John. We are working together for quite a while now. So what we did actually, when I set up Common Land, and I came from the conservation world as a former director of the IUCN Netherlands, I realized that if you bring different stakeholders together and you start talking about what a landscape is, you have different opinions. People have no clue, actually. A farmer will tell something about his own farm. An ecologist will tell you something about a watershed or biodiversity. If you ask a financier or investor, you know, that person will only look into an investable business case. And governments quite often are lacking, and if they're not lacking, they don't have a continuation. Quite often after 4 or 5 years, you have a different government and a different system. So the complexity here, I wanted to bring a simplification of the complexity so that people could understand, so how can you restore a large landscape? Maybe can someone change the slide? So what we did is we came first with a narrative that was understandable by all stakeholders, because stakeholders are the barrier in this way. We are talking about landscapes the size of Luxembourg and bigger. So bigger than 100,000 hectares, for instance, because you need to think about ecology. So time is important. You need to have decades, the time of making this huge green infrastructure work. The narrative is more about how can you reach the heart as well as the pocket of people. The heart means that you need to look into what is the characteristic of a degraded landscape. And a degraded landscape is basically, you see 4 losses. You see a loss of purpose because people are leaving those areas. You see a loss of communities. You see a loss of biodiversity. And at the end, you see a loss of income, finance. So a degraded landscape is characterized by maximization of return on investment, which is always causing per hectare, is creating degradation. A restored landscape is characterized by return for losses. So you need to bring back inspiration, bring back social returns, biodiversity net returns and financial returns. People understand that narrative. The second thing is you need to do it place-based. So in that huge landscape, you need to understand the ecology. Where should nature thrive, protected areas, ecological corridors? Where do we need to transform chemical agriculture towards more regenerative forms, or rotational grazing, or agroforestry? And where do people live? Cities, infrastructure, hard infrastructure, and so on. In that sense, people in those landscapes start to understand how massive that landscape is and what can you do if you have sufficient time. So we call that the 4 returns framework for healthy landscapes. And we started in 2013 working with this. So now we have tested this framework in more than 23 countries, and we started in 4, Spain, Australia, South Africa, and the Netherlands. In all those places, those are large areas. We've built communities, landscape partnerships. We have sorted out and developed business cases. One of those business cases even led to a listed one regenerative company in Australia. So things are now faster after 11 years. We see that the narrative is working. So what we foresee the coming years, and that's why it's so exciting that we are here, is that the 4 returns framework can become the Intel inside of the upcoming landscape restoration industry. And that is where we need to go. Because it is understood. People understand this, they know how to work with this, you can measure it because there are KPIs underneath each of those returns. We have a whole monitoring evaluation framework. So also investors gradually step on board, and sometimes governments already are partner of this. So is it difficult? Yes. Is it possible? Finally, after 11 years of testing it, and you can go to our website, commonland.com, you see, yes, it's now starting to become mainstream in some of those areas where we are working. And that's just fascinating.
It is extremely fascinating, and it just resonates how much you talk about how it's about people, and John talked about this too. It's about the people who work, the people who need to live, the people who need to eat, the people who want to invest.
Exactly. Yeah, the beauty is that, finance, there's a lot of finance, you see it everywhere, but the beauty, and there's technology, but the biggest barriers are people and ecology. Now we can say it after 11 years, it is working. Yeah.
That is spectacular, and it's why I'm also so glad we're here with Isaias, who really works on how do we educate people about these things. Our global food system crisis can sometimes feel inevitable, scary to tackle. As a young person, how do you see the global food system crisis can be addressed through food justice?
Yeah, so I think one example I love to use, and similar to the Bible example, is we look at the food system as like the behemoth. So the behemoth in literature and mythology is used as this very monstrous creature. And I think when we're looking at the global food system, we've really designed a titan, right? In the United States, specifically where I'm from, we've seen that it's been propped as this very huge mechanism to provide the benefits for the American people. However, that's been really slowly collapsing in the minds of Americans, where many people are now questioning where their food is coming from the pesticide usage to the displacement of ecologies, of indigenous communities, and to the ongoing prices of food rising in our global crises that we face today. And so I think when we look at the global food system, I think it's important that we recognize that as we see the rise of these technocratic solutions that are coming in, whether you look at the plant-based industry or the cellular agriculture industries, one of my biggest concerns is that not the fact that these technologies are profitable, it's the fact that the ways in which language is being used as a way to, quote unquote, say it's radical, it's going to change the world. However, to really tackle this crisis, we need to look back at history and the existing principles that have existed, right? So in Mexico, my family were farmers. They grew up in rural areas. My grandparents were part of the Bracero program where they worked in the US as farmers and then came back to Mexico. And, you know, throughout their whole time of history, they were taught to always tend the land and to be able to be responsive to those types of experiences. Yet right now what we're seeing is I feel that we rely too much on these technocratic solutions as like almost as swords to really defeat these systems when we know that they're not defeating the system. They're just capital resource exchanges. So if companies themselves are promising that they're going to be shifting or changing the food system, we have to start to say, is it radically changing or is it just creating another existing issue while trying to band-aid it as a solution? As a forager myself, you know, one of those things is I believe that foraging is an act of ecological reverence, right? So the idea of wanting to become more connected to those species that are unknown to most humans. And in fact, you know, the diets of those areas where I would eat locally in my areas in the United States, I would have never been exposed to them in the grocery stores. In fact, I didn't know about the amount of mushrooms and myceliums and plant and flora that exist out there that are edible that are not sold in the American market. So I do think that when we talk in the lens around food justice, right, it's about taking back power. It's about reestablishing the existing solutions. Like in urban areas, the criminalizations of poor Black and brown people of color who are criminalized to going to get food from food dumpsters, or not being able to grow a garden in a pavement. We need to be able to understand that the access to nature is a human right, and we need to be able to start to build around those green infrastructure policies today.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I'm so excited that there's an intergenerational aspect to this discussion. Isaiah, what do you think about this COP? Do you have any hopes, concerns, or what do you think is the best thing we can get out of this COP?
Yeah, I think with COP28, everyone's pretty much tired at the end of this week now, but I do think that the most important thing to take away from these is that there's multidimensional industries that are existing here, right? Whether you're in policy, energy, finance, fashion, entertainment, media, like there's so many existing things that are happening. And I believe that these institutional conferences do serve a certain purposes to help push more mechanisms that are needed. But at the same time, I think that it is important to understand that many of the people that are still in these local rural communities are not being represented and are still fighting for these solutions. So while we are in these places of privilege, even myself, I do recognize that I am not so much an expert in my own field, but the people who are the closest to the land, those who are closest to growing the food, and those who are closest to fighting for their territories are the ones who deserve to be here today. And so I think the takeaways from COP28 for me is just recognizing that yes, governmental policies are essential. Yes, the private sector is needed to understand and release those funds that they have to accelerate their change, but also young people that are here today are going to be able to communicate that better to other younger generations. I mean, seeing 11-year-old climate activists here at this conference was disappointing, because I realized that even as I was an 11-year-old maybe 15 years ago, 16 years ago, I wasn't doing this work, and seeing that makes me sad that we aren't doing enough for them.
Thank you so much for that. I want to ask you, Willem, that same question. What are your thoughts on this COP? What's to be achieved? What are you most hopeful for?
Yeah, no, I think I have been into several COPs, and especially the climate COP was a lot about technology and mitigation. I think this is the first COP where you see nature, forest, agriculture, and climate change stuff, including technology and finance, coming together. And that brings hope. And of course, you can talk a lot about the negotiations and the leadership. You know, that's really tough. But this really needs to move and merge together. We need to move towards holistic solutions. If we can't find holistic solutions, there's no hope. And because we are talking about it now and things are moving, and there are lots of examples of people on the ground working on this in such a way, I think the younger generation and the next generation will be able to lead this further because they have a different mentality, and these two things are now coming together. I think they will be the leaders who understand holism better than we do, and so I'm hopeful, and I'm also hopeful because nature is much more resilient than we can imagine, and as we are part of nature, we are resilient and adaptive as well.
That is a wonderful way to think about it. Not something I don't think I thought about it that way before. Nature is more resilient than we think, and that means that we are too. John, what are your thoughts on this COP?
Yeah, well, I think what we really have to consider is that we have to act globally, that it's physical. And so the COP is really kind of conceptual and theoretical and financial, and it's about power dynamics. And I think that there are people who are not here. And there are large numbers of people who are disenfranchised in the world. And what I also see is that the superpower of human beings is collective intelligence and collective action. So we're a social species, and we need to act locally, but we also have to, in order to succeed in addressing the problems that we face, we have to do this simultaneously all over the world. And who are the people who have the ability to do that? So a lot of people are very engaged in their own activities, but there are a lot of people who are disenfranchised. And those people actually they have a lot to gain and nothing to lose by doing large-scale ecosystem restoration. And they can be taught to do this, and that's what we saw in China. When people did large-scale ecosystem restoration in China, their lives transformed. They became wealthy. Their children went to the top universities in just a generation. So, and China transformed from a desperately poor country to a superpower. So what do we need to do? We need transformational change. And we need those people to be honored and to be respected and have the ability to regain their human rights. And if we look at how they lost their human rights, well, it was expansion of colonial powers who caused genocide and slavery and all these other feudal things. And of course, slowly that's kind of been recognized and nobody wants that, but what happened to these people? There are millions and hundreds of millions and billions of people at the edges of degraded landscapes. What are they to do? And humanity needs to restore large-scale degraded landscapes. Well, that looks like a perfect scenario to have the people be able to feed themselves, be treated with respect, and return their human rights and have a place to live on the earth. So this is what I hope that will go out to the COP, and to understand that this is a responsibility, not from some people, but from everybody, and that we're all indigenous to the earth, and that we have the power to restore soils, to restore the hydrological cycle, to restore the vegetation and the biodiversity. But we have to do it. And so it's not a policy decision, it's not a financial decision, it's a decision to do it. And we're always talking about the price. We really need to talk about the value. What's the value of mitigation and adaptation to climate change and food security for everyone and engagement for everyone at a time when we face exponential threats from climate change, biodiversity loss, food insecurity, and war? So this is, we have an opportunity. We should be looking at the opportunity. We should be understanding this opportunity.
Thank you so much for that. Isaias, in your work, what do you think is the thing that gets young people most excited or most activated to want to get involved, to do what John is talking about?
Yeah, I think it's storytelling, right, in media, right? As a media creative, my background is environmental science. I grew up watching Nat Geo and Discovery Channel as my biggest inspirations to being an environmentalist, and I did wildlife conservation, studying lizards in Miami, which was very interesting. And I remember, stories are so powerful tools to really hold those stories together, right? They're the cultural foundations of many societies, and each and every one of us, right, have those cultural heritages of our families of what we love to do. And I think with young people today, and Gen Z specifically, is that we really want to see next generation of leaders or people telling new stories too, while also collaborating with those who have been doing the work and really have paved the way for us to be able to enter the industry. Because I really, on my own end, didn't really see that many people of color that were environmental storytellers. It often seemed that to be a filmmaker, to produce your own content, you needed to have all of this experience. And so I really think that by showcasing to young people the power of grassroots media to be able to tell their story really allows them to really reclaim themselves and feel validated in the space.
Thank you for that. How about we give the last word to you? If you had just a few things to say to the people negotiating right now, the President and the Secretary General, what would be that message?
Wow. Okay. Let's make it easy. We have hard infrastructure and billions of investments. We have green infrastructure, almost no investments. Let's turn the page. Let's move all the billions in hard infrastructure and use that comparison, move that to green infrastructure. It is much more resilient, it's much more faster. You will bring happy people and a different aspect that people forget about in this work, you depolarize. And that is definitely needed because there is a depolarization between rural and urban areas and within rural areas that is happening. And we have experienced that over the last years. It is really changing mindsets of people. Because if you're going to work together to create and beautify your own landscape, your own place, you need to work together and you get better understanding of each other. So it is also about halting polarization. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I know that that's always the hope for international negotiations and diplomacy. Can we actually get at peace and understanding through climate action? Well, thanks to all three of my panelists so much. Thank you to the International Society of Ecological Economics. Thank you in the audience for being here, and thank you for watching Facing Future TV.